George Miller was single, living in a city far from his family. He was feeling lonely, so he decided to adopt a dog. The 29-year-old can't be separated from his pup. In his mind, dogs really are a man's best friend. If someone asks Miller how his dog is, he'll immediately call him loyal and one of the sweetest animals you'll ever see. But Miller was unaware of something about his pooch. What happened made Miller question everything. He didn't understand how a dog could have done something like this. What he did made Miller wonder if it was the same dog he'd adopted. Crosby really was a sweet dog. He loved to play with other animals whenever Miller took him to the park. Crosby would often not want to leave after he grew fond of someone. Crosby trusted everyone he came across. He could bond with anything. This meant he grew fond of the animals next door, a cat and a dog. They'd been getting up to mischief for nearly 8 years, but then the unthinkable happened. Crosby's 2 best friends passed away in quick succession. This left their owner very sad, but as it turns out, Crosby was devastated by what happened too. Miller didn't notice the change in Crosby's behavior at first. They do the same things every day, but Miller didn't see the warning signs his dog was giving him. Miller finally noticed when he got home after a long day of work and looked forward to his furry friend greeting him. But what he saw instead was something that he never wanted to relive. Crosby wouldn't answer Miller's calls. He soon found him staring at the wall in the living room. Why wasn't Crosby answering him? Was his hearing going? Miller called out with even more strength, so his voice reverberated around the room, and still nothing. He crouched down next to his pal and stared at the spot on the wall he was so fascinated about. What was up? Miller was very concerned. He lovingly stroked his dog in desperation, and Crosby suddenly snapped out of it. Miller looked directly at his dog and said, "What is it, boy?" Looking into his dog's eyes, he gave him another pat and breathed a sigh of relief. Whatever was wrong with him, he was fine now. Maybe it was just a bug on the wall, but unawares to Miller, it was something way bigger. Crosby had acted normal the entire night afterwards, but when Miller woke up at midnight parched, he decided to get a glass of water. As he passed the living room, he noticed Crosby doing it again, but something was different now. There seemed to be a gray cloud over him. He looked so sad as he looked intently at the same spot on the wall as earlier. Miller had to figure out what was wrong with Crosby. He decided to wake up extra early and head straight to the closest store. When he got there, he found a camera that had night vision. He drove back home and put it in his house before heading off to work. He didn't watch it when he got home. He decided to wait until the next day so he'd have more footage to look through. Why was Crosby doing this, and what would he find on the footage? What Miller found on the footage was that Crosby wouldn't stare at the wall when he was away. He'd only run up to the wall and look at it whenever Miller was entering the room. Was he trying to communicate? Miller craned his neck into the living room to see the spot on the wall. As Miller entered the room and crouched down to look at the wall a bit closer, he heard Crosby playfully barking and coming into the room. Crosby hadn't acted this happy in weeks, not since his furry pals passed away. Crosby let out another cheerful bark as Miller dropped to his knees for a closer inspection. Suddenly, he heard a noise and froze. What on earth was that, he whispered. His heartbeat raced as he realized something was inside the wall. His jaw dropped as he looked wildly back at Crosby. Miller broke off a piece of the wooden paneling that had fallen loose right next to the floor and was surprised to see a hole in the drywall. He took a deep breath and plunged his hand in until he was elbow deep, but as he gingerly felt around inside, his eyes widened in disbelief. Clumps of drywall poured everywhere, but then he thought he felt something different. He grabbed hold of it carefully and pulled it out, but it was just a handful of dirt, insulation, and drywall. The cries became more urgent and he knew he was close. He dug through the dirt, clearing a way for his arm to go deeper. Carefully, Miller felt around inside the hole and his fingers brushed against something small and soft. He thought it might just be more insulation, but just then, Crosby let out a high-pitched whine, as if encouraging him not to give up. His hand closed around the tiny creature, and when he pulled it up again, his heart dropped. A little kitten had hidden itself within the loose wall paneling of the wall between his living room and washroom. However, what was bizarre about this was the kitten closely resembled Crosby's best cat friend. Stranger still, Miller had no idea how the tiny kitten had ended up in this situation, but he suspected it had something to do with Crosby. The tiny kitten was covered in dust, but how'd she gotten inside the wall in the first place? And what was her mother nearby? Would she look for her if she took her away? He had to think about what was best for the tiny creature. What's more, it was almost impossible for the kitten to have gotten inside the house by itself. Crosby must have brought her in somehow with all his despair for company. Miller carefully cleaned the little kitten up and gently wiped the dust from her fur with a damp cloth. He looked down at Crosby, who was wagging his tail wildly and looking very pleased with himself. The kitten couldn't have been more than 8 weeks old, and Miller had no idea how to properly care for her. He just hoped that she had owners who were looking for her. Miller immediately looked for the kitten's owners but couldn't find any. He went to all his neighbors and even hung up posters, but he never heard back. Some neighbors told Miller that they'd seen the kitten in the street before and think she's a stray. Miller then took her to the vet. The vet checked the kitten over, but apart from being ravenous and dirty, she seemed to be in perfect health. Then the vet scanned the back of her neck to see if she had a microchip, but she didn't. Miller posted a photo on his neighborhood's Facebook group, but still nobody came forward to claim her. Miller knew she had to make a tough decision soon. Meanwhile, Crosby loved having her around. He was becoming more and more like the joyful, goofy pup Miller knew him to be, but still Miller never really wanted a cat, so he asked the vet about taking her to the shelter. It broke his heart, but he was determined. Little did he know the universe was working in Crosby's favor. The vet basically told me that if I took her to the shelter, she'd be put down because there are already over 300 kittens at the county shelter alone that need homes, Miller said. He said I could try putting her outside and hope she goes home, or I could keep her. With no choice but to keep her, Miller arrived home with a new member of his family and a very excited Crosby. It was a win-win. Crosby was no longer lonely and the kitten now had a loving home. Miller named the kitten Lil Ray Ray, and Miller, well, he learned to pay more attention to what his dog was trying to tell him in the future.